Thank you very much. Again, I apologize for jumping the gun when I introduced myself, and I didn't get a chance to introduce Catherine. But I want to thank you for inviting me, and I hope that some of the information that I can give will be heartwarming or remembering things of the past. In 1943, my family moved from San Pedro, California, which was basically a fishing community. In the neighborhood I grew up in, either you were a fisherman or on one of the boats or sold or packed the fish. I mean, that was the industry. My father was a wholesale fish dealer, and one of the reasons why my mother had, because of the climatic conditions, ended up with asthma real bad. And the doctor prescribed, why don't you go somewhere where there's drier climate. And so my father started checking around and found out that my godfather, Tony Jerkovich, lived in Kerman, and he found out about my mother's problems, so he invited my family to come up here for a month. So Papa rented a car. We didn't have a car at that time. We had a fish delivery little wagon that my dad drove around, and we came up here. So we were here about 2 weeks, and then my dad came back. He went back to San Pedro, but he came back and he asked me, "Where's Mama?" I says, "Well, she's out in the field." And he said, "Your mother is in the field? What's she doing?" I was pulling weeds. And my father walked, he was at a pair of slacks on and a dress shoe. He walked right through the sand, and he just to see my mother out there. He couldn't believe it. He looked at her and says, "You're not going back to San Pedro. That's it." This was on a Friday. Saturday morning, my father and Tony Jerkovich, my godfather, went to see somebody. I don't even know the man's name. And he says, "There's a place for sale, a Modoc in Dakota." And that afternoon, my dad bought the place. So we made the big move, and we came up to Kerman. Now, I was at first, a little shocked. There was no sidewalk to skate on, which I love roller skating. So that took care of that real situation real quick like. And it was nothing but sand. But there was one joyful thing. Uncle Tony, I'll refer to as Tony Jerkovich, I call him Uncle Tony, had a Caterpillar tractor, a 22 Caterpillar tractor, and he taught me to drive the thing. And I love driving it because I used to pretend like I was in World War II fighting the Germans and what have you. And it was a tank, so I got a kick out of that. So here comes school time. This is harvest. We got to pick the grapes. My dad, who had never, I think he ate grapes from the grocery store, but the idea of raising grapes and making raisins, that was a whole new world for him. But through the grace of God and neighbors and what have you, he ended up making raisins. Well, came school time. So my dad loads me into the car because I had no idea where the high school was. And we go over to the high school. So, and in those days, see, I went to a parochial school. We wore a uniform. We wore black pants or knickers, white shirt, and a black tie. That was it. Well, I wore a white shirt, black tie, and knickers. Well, you can imagine when I walked out of the truck and walked across the campus, and everybody's looking, who's this strange-looking duck? But I ran into one of the ladies who were checking me, and he says, we at Kerman don't wear ties. The boys don't wear ties. Okay, so I took my tie off quickly because I didn't want to be part of the gang. But I did notice one thing. As we were going into the office, the noise in a hallway, kids were laughing and joking. At St. Mary's, or the Mary Star of the Sea, where I went to school, in the hallways no one talked. You just didn't talk, and it was always quiet. Again, it's parochial ideas. So I go to my first period class. I'm sitting there, and of course, freshman, everybody else was freshman, and a teacher, and this was another shock for me, they were female teachers. I was used to nothing but male teachers, female teachers, and this teacher was calling the roll call to find out, and everybody said, here, typical, and she come to me, and I stood up and said my name, and sat down. And everybody looked at me. Who's this strange duck is standing up? And looking real stirred. But that's what we did at Holy Mary Star, the elementary school I went to, and at junior high school. Now, high school was a real treat and a half for me. I learned real quickly. The kid lived directly across the street from me, where we bought the ranch. Ended up becoming one of the closest friends I ever had in high school, and today, he and I still communicate with one another, and we talk about the good old days. And we also had one of the discussions was, what did we do for fun? Well, when we're on a school bus, we always checked out outhouses, because came Halloween, we knocked them over. Of course, nowadays they got them on trailers. You're not about to push one of those suckers over. So that took care of that. And the restaurant, I got a kick out of it. We had, I think it was 3 or 4 restaurants in Kerman, and one of them was on Belvedere Drive-In, and that was a classic place to go to. Directly across the street was Potsakov's hardware store, a grocery store, and he had a locker where if you had the animals we killed and what have you, and we could store them in his locker. On the other corner was another grocery store. So Belmont and Madera Avenue was the trade center for Kerman at that time in history. You come through Kerman down 145, was Madera Avenue to me, and you come to Whitesbridge, stop sign. Come into Kerman, and that was a shock and a half. Here is a town with 2 lanes going through town, one in one direction and the other direction. In the middle, eucalyptus trees. Never heard of eucalyptus trees in town. Now, you remember I came from a city, a metropolitan area. To have a tree anywhere in your yard was something else, but never in the street. Now, one of the fun things about having it in the street is the eucalyptus leaves would drop, and if any kind of rain, it made that road about as slick as you're going to get it. So the big thing is seeing how fast and how to make your car spin in a circle. That was kicks in those days. But the only thing I really remembered back that was important to me is the people of Kerman at that time in history. A car drove by, I don't care where it was, you waved because it was someone you knew. Nowadays, a car goes by, you have no idea who he is. Now, there was an older gentleman, I would think about myself, but he came up to visit my father, and he said to my father, he says, "Where are the clamming forks?" And my dad says, "Clamming forks? What for?" He says, "Well, all this sand you have around there's got to be a damn clam somewhere." Well, forget it, there's no clams at Kerman. But anyway, he also counted, I can't be verified, I don't know for a fact, he counted, at that time, he counted 138 people in Kerman had telephones. Now, whether that's true, I don't know, but that's what he said. And I take his word for it. But one of the fun things about a telephone was when our ring was too short, one long. So it rang too short, one long, you picked it up. But if you heard a neighbor's ring, you could hear his ring, whoever it was or she, And if you want to know what's going on in Kerman, you pick up the phone and listen. And you talk about a party line. That was a very successful and fun thing to do. The whole tempo, the high school, I reflect back, we very seldom won a football game, but we went there and we played for what it was worth. And I can remember we were so proud at our Kerman High School had one of the finest gymnasiums at that time in history. And now, of course, it's abandoned. And every time I drive by that site, and I figured, where have you gone? You know, because that was a beautiful memories. The whole area, the helpfulness of the neighbors. Neighbors were always there to help, and I can always remember Wally and I were going to roll. Mr. Booth was his name, an old English gentleman, very proud. We were going to roll trays for him, so we got out to roll trays, and they offered to pay us. And I came home and I told my dad, I said, Mr. Booth wants to pay us. My father says, pay you for what? I said, we roll trays all day long. He says he's a neighbor and he needed your help. And that was the way it went. We never got any money for it, but again, neighbors would help one another. Now, I don't even know the neighborhood. And at that time in history, if you had 20 acres, you were a very prosperous man, particularly if it was paid for. Uncle Tony had 180 acres at that time, and we thought he was rich because that was a lot of land, or was that 180 acres at that time. And the whole atmosphere of Kerman was different. And then I graduated from Kerman High School and went looking for a job, and then couldn't find one, so I decided I left at the post office in Fresno, and there's a big sign that says, and be a Marine. I very well, that looks good. I'd look good in that uniform, so I decided to join. I went home and told my father, he said, you're doing what? And I said, I'm going to join the Marine Corps. My dad said, well, okay, we'll sign for you, because I was only 17 years old. I turned 18 years old on Guam. By the time I'd already been shot once and hit with a hand grenade before I was able to buy a drink in the United States. So I figured there goes history. But it was a different society, even in the service. And I always reflect back, the friends I had in high school wrote to me the entire time, because I was on Guam for a long period of time, and they wrote to me. I got letters when I was in a hospital in Japan. There was always this tightness about my class, and that tightness is still there. As I said again, Wally and I still communicate with one another because our friendship was very, very important to us. The changes, remarkable. The high school, my graduating class was 53, and we were one of the biggest classes they had in years.
No.
Now you take a look at it. I think the entire school at Kerman High School was around 235 or 240 kids. Now you take a look at what's happened, an explosion. What was once a nice, quiet little community is now thriving. Again, what caused it? People didn't want to live in Fresno. I can see the reason why. I mean, every time I go to town, we get on it used to be White's Bridge, or of course now it's 140 and 180. And the thing is, what's helping me is I'm legally blind. So they took away my driver's license, and I got to tell you this one. I go into the DMV because I need an identification, and my driver's license expired. I know I couldn't pass, and I go up to the lady, a young lady, and I said, I got to renew my license. She says, yes. I read the chart. I go A, B, C, D. She said, no. Look at the scope. If you can't see it, I looked at the scope and I couldn't read it. And she looked at me and said, I have to deny your driver's license. I says, well, I'm grateful for one thing. I still got 2 more years on my pilot's license before it expires. I also told her I was a pilot for KLM Airlines. I bet she never flies that plane. Anyway, you got to have a sense of humor with the whole thing. But again, I love Kerman. You say, well, I went to Chico State. We lived in Chico for a couple of, by 8 years. We moved back to Kerman, and I'm so grateful for the move, because it's still, Kerman will always be my home. You say, well, San Pedro should be home. And no, thank you. The traffic, the people, it's a whole different atmosphere. Of course, we lived in the ghettos at that time in San Pedro because we didn't know that. We thought everybody lived like this. So, but again, Kerman, as I say, has been wonderful. The changes, the high school, for example, as huge as it is, which was a little small 2-story building out in the middle of the country. They had 6 buses, I know that for a fact at that time, and that brought all the kids from Kerman to high school. Can you imagine how many buses it would take to bring all those kids out there if they had the high school there? You can see why the move is there. And every time I see that another building being added, I says, well, that's history and progress. I don't understand half of it, but then again, as my mother used to say, I'm getting so old I don't remember where I came and where I'm going. And I said, neither do I. So with that, if there are any questions, I'll be more than glad to try to answer them.